Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross, here in the studio in Cowcaddens. My guest this evening via Skype is Chris McCusker from the SNP Socialist Group. Welcome again, Chris, to the show.
Good evening, comrades.
Okay, I'm going to dive straight in, first of all, Chris, to the coronavirus update, as we usually do at the beginning of the show. As of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there's been a total of 35,392 coronavirus tests concluded. And of these, 28,290 tests were confirmed positive. I think I'll start that again. Apologies. The 28,290 tests were confirmed negative. 7,102 tests were positive. 196 patients were in intensive care last night, with 191 of those having tested positive. And this marks an increase of 354 confirmed cases since yesterday. Now, the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection has sadly risen now to 779. The latest UK figures available show that 13,729 patients who were tested positive for COVID-19 have now sadly died from their illness. A total of 327,608 people have been tested in the UK, of which tongue-tied tonight with my numbers, I beg your pardon, of which 224,515 were negative, and 103,093 were confirmed positive. It is, of course, now, it's been said, too early to lift the lockdown. And following today's COBRA meeting, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said that the coronavirus lockdown in Scotland should continue for at least another 3 weeks. Although she's confident the lockdown appears to have slowed the COVID-19 spread, she said that we are by no means through this yet, and she encouraged people to continue to stay at home to help prevent further spread of the virus. The English Health Minister Matt Hancock said that the novel coronavirus outbreak is starting to peak, but it's too early to lift the lockdown. Forgive me. We seem to have a script problem here. Beg your pardon. We'll go to the paper script. Sometimes we get the odd problem. Okay, first story tonight, actually, Chris, is the UK government. And the SNP has said that the United Kingdom government must introduce urgent health measures for people travelling to the UK, including health checks and quarantine measures at the borders. Joanna Cherry QC MP has written to Priti Patel, raising concerns about the Home Secretary's failure to act, which has meant hundreds of thousands of people have entered the UK without appropriate checks and measures in the months since the pandemic began. The SNP Shadow Home Secretary said that the Home Office must finally bring the UK into line with other countries where tighter measures are being placed on travel in response to the coronavirus. Now, Chris, here's a story that a lot of people have been talking about this, the business of the fact that nobody is being tested, Chris, as they come into the country. Forgive me, I've just been asked if I can redo the figures. We seem to have had some inaccurate figures at the beginning of the programme on the autocue. Okay, I'm going to reread the figures, the correct figures for the coronavirus now off the paper script. So as of 2 p.m. today, in Scotland, there's been a total of 40,700 coronavirus tests concluded. And of these, 32,250 tests were confirmed as negative. 8,450 tests were positive. 169 patients were in intensive care last night, with 167 having tested positive. And this marks an increase of 263 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 915. The latest UK figures available show that 16,509 patients who tested for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. A total of 386,044 people have now been tested in the United Kingdom, of which 261,301 were negative and 124,743 confirmed positive. Now, Chris, I'm sorry to do this back to front with you this evening. I had a little bit of problem with our auto cue there. But the main story I wanted to talk about first, Chris, was this the call from the SNP, from Joanna Cherry, for Priti Patel to do something about the checks at the British borders for people coming into the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, this has been a problem that's just has failed to be addressed, and I've actually got a slight personal experience in this. My younger cousin, who is second down from a ship's captain in the Merchant Navy, he works for Clyde Marine. He's been stranded on a ship off of the Bay of India for the last something like 64 or 72 days. A couple of days ago, he was airlifted off of his ship, taken to mainland India, and the last I heard, he was waiting for a flight, a government flight, in order to take him to Heathrow. Now, he was saying to me on Facebook Messenger that when they arrive in India and stuff like that, they all get tested, and and nobody on the boat was showing signs of COVID-19, and they were all sort of like fit and healthy. So I'm fairly hopeful that that's the case for all the crew. But then what happens in that transition from India to Britain? I mean, who says that plane is 100% sanitized?
Yeah.
And that's a bit of worry that would prey on anyone's mind, whether they were the traveller or if they are a member of family of the traveller. So, the other stories about the flights, the international flights that are still coming in, as well as many private jets that are coming in and given landing slots at Heathrow, is actually quite shocking in the extreme when you consider that many countries are only allowing air freight cargo to even get into their airspace, let alone
Chris,
land.
I can remember many years ago flying to Australia. I think it was a British Airways flight, and we stopped off at Muscat. And as you know, Muscat's in the Middle East. And I remember we were told when we landed that we would not be allowed to get off the plane because there was a cholera outbreak in Muscat. And I thought, well, if you have an outbreak of anything anywhere, surely the passengers getting off planes would either need to be checked, quarantined, or treated in some way to make sure, A, that they were protected themselves, and also to make sure that people in the country where they were arriving were protected in case they had brought anything in with them.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I don't like to use this as an analogy, but here we go. In my experience dispatching aircraft at Glasgow Airport, people's pets, people's canines, people's cats, stuff like that, they get treated before they get checked in, and they get separated, and then they get put into the hold. Once they get to the destination, they are checked again.
Yeah.
And they have a 2-week quarantine period in any country before they are allowed to be reunited with the family. Now, if we do that for animals, why in God's name wouldn't we not do that for human beings?
Well, I think, first of all, you'd need to have a quarantine facility somewhere to put the people while they were being quarantined.
Well, of course you would need to have a facility, but they have ploughed millions into the NHS Nightingale. Equally, Scotland has ploughed millions into the NHS Louisa Jordan.
Yep.
So where there's a will, there's a way, Gordon. And we're talking about human life here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a lot of talk, actually. I mean, people are actually talking all the time on the internet at the moment, on social media particularly, about closing the border between Scotland and England, introducing checks there. Although that would be impractical, I'm certain.
Well, it would be, I don't think it would be impractical. I think it would be problematic, to say the least. Yes, you would still have a steady flow of goods and services, but your average Joe Schmo bumping up in a caravan, would definitely be able to get, sort of like sent back and told that you shouldn't be travelling and stuff like that. So, there are practical things that you could do. And several countries, do operate a border system where you literally have to go to a checkpoint and you are asked what your business is.
Indeed.
Where you are going, what hotel are you checked into, the length of your journey, the purpose of your journey.
Yeah.
I've had it, out with COVID-19, travelling down when I'm going over to Cali for Eastwood Refugee Aid. And I've been challenged by border staff and asked what I'm doing.
Okay, Chris,
where I'm going and who am I staying with and
Chris.
who am I seeing. And so, it would be a logistical nightmare, granted, but it is feasible to do. Again, where there's a will, there's a way.
Okay, Chris, listen, I need to stop you there for the moment and move on to our next story. And that is that the New York mayor says that lack of coronavirus testing might actually delay the city reopening. The New York mayor, Bill de Blasio, said today that it could take weeks, if not months, before the country's most populous city reopens due to lack of widespread testing, even as officials elsewhere began rolling back restrictions on daily life. De Blasio, whose city is at the epicenter of the coronavirus crisis in the United States, said that New York needed to be conducting hundreds of thousands of tests a day and to see hospitalizations decline further before reopening the economy. We could get there, but we can't do it without widespread testing. And so far, the federal government still can't get a handle on that, de Blasio said on MSNBC's Morning Joe programme, adding that ending social distancing too soon could rekindle the virus. The federal government especially needs to get the memo that this thing ain't over, and if you pretend it's over, it's only going to boomerang back and make it worse. De Blasio's warning on testing echoed comments by several governors over the weekend, disputing President Trump's claims that they have enough tests for COVID-19, the respiratory disease caused by the novel coronavirus. The United States has by far the world's largest number of confirmed coronavirus cases, with more than 750,000 infections and over 40,500 deaths, nearly half of them in the state of New York. Trump's guidelines to reopen the economy recommend a state record 14 days of declining case numbers before gradually lifting the restrictions. And yet the Republican president appeared to encourage protesters who want to reopen sooner with a series of Twitter posts on Friday calling for them to liberate Michigan, Minnesota and Virginia, all run by Democratic governors. An estimated 2,500 people rallied at Washington state capitol in Olympia to protest Democratic Governor Jay Inslee's stay-at-home order, one of several protests. Residents in Florida were allowed to return to some beaches after Governor Ron DeSantis approved the relaxing of some restrictions. Charlie Latham, the mayor of Jacksonville Beach, said that the first weekend the beach there reopened with limited hours went well, with no arrests for people violating social distancing rules, which include a prohibition of chairs and blankets. So in America, Chris, there are the same sort of arguments taking place about when their lockdown should be stopped. And it would appear that President Trump is playing political games with states run by Democratic governors.
Well, there's no surprise there. But, what's happening in America right now is, quite frankly, it's nuts. We've all seen the various videos from Florida and people out on the streets with placards, with their mouths covered over and saying, open our beaches. It's a human right to sunbathe. And in stark contrast, you've got people in the inner states of the US, quite clearly, overtly looking, like white supremacists, turning around and saying that the government are actually acting like communists. And to accuse Donald Trump, you can accuse Donald Trump of many things, but you can never accuse him of being a bloody communist.
Chris,
you know what I mean?
One of the observations I made, Chris, when I was looking at this last night, was the fact that I think it was in Michigan, the protesters at City Hall were all armed with assault rifles.
Yeah.
Something which would terrify the wits out of people in this country.
I mean, honestly, that's why I say it's completely nuts. It really is, and it needs a level head, and you just don't have a level head in Donald Trump, I'm afraid. So you are always going to have that rockabilly hick.
And and Chris, of course, he's using this sort of wartime language as well, of liberating places. Now, before I get off the subject of wartime rhetoric and guns, our next story actually concerns guns in a big way. A gunman apparently has killed 16 people in Nova Scotia in Canada's worst ever mass shooting. A gunman who at one point masqueraded as a policeman killed at least 16 people in the Canadian province of Nova Scotia during a 12-hour rampage, authorities said on Sunday, in what was the country's worst modern-era mass shooting. Among the victims of the shooting spree that spread across part of the Atlantic Canadian province was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, Heidi Stevenson, a 23-year-old veteran of the force with 2 children. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police said the gunman, 51-year-old Gabriel Wortman, who worked as a denturist, appeared at one stage to have been wearing part of a police uniform. He had also painstakingly disguised his car to look like a police car. The police added that they had ended the threat posed by Wortman, who was dead, but they would not confirm a report by the CTV network that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had shot him. Wortman shot people in several locations in Nova Scotia, the RCMP told the briefing. RCMP Commissioner Brenda Luckie told the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation that the police knew of at least 16 victims besides the shooter. She added that there was no indication at this time that the killings were terrorist-related. The police said there was no apparent link between Wortman and at least some of his victims. They said they have no idea what his motivation might have been. Today is a devastating day for Nova Scotia, and it will remain etched in the minds for many years to come, said Lee Bergerman, commanding officer of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Nova Scotia. The death toll exceeded that of a Montreal massacre in 1989 when a gunman killed 15 women. Mass shootings are relatively rare in Canada, which has tighter gun control laws than the United States. Nova Scotia, like the rest of Canada, is under a stay-at-home order because of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Chris, I know this is not really a political story. This is a human tragedy on a huge scale, though. For the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are not normally caught up in mass shootings like this.
No, and again, I have to turn to social media. I mean, I've seen a couple of stories, and they were likening this to one of the Dirty Harry movies, which was, I think it was Magnum Force, where David Soul and his fellow mates all are actually serving police officers. And they just go out randomly shooting people, for crimes against the city. So it really is a tragic event that has obviously been triggered by some real psychological imbalances. We never really associate Canada with gun violence.
What I was going to say, Chris, was that this seems like a very premeditated attack. This man must have planned the attack for days or even weeks. I mean, to go to the trouble of disguising your car as a police cruiser and faking a police uniform, he obviously meant business.
Yeah, but and that's why I'm saying that I think it was wholly right to draw comparisons between one of Clint Eastwood's films. Because it is honestly too script of Magnum Force, and again, it's just not something that you associate Canada with.
No,
You
it's not.
always say
Indeed.
that Canada is the more sensible out of the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when it comes to gun law.
Well, listen,
It's absolutely horrendous to think that somebody could even contemplate this, let alone carry it out.
well, listen, Chris, I'm sorry to cut you off in the middle of this story, but we are going to move on now to our next story this evening. And that is that the SNP is calling for the overhaul of the United Kingdom government's hostile immigration policies. The SNP's shadow immigration spokesperson has called on the UK government to overhaul its hostile and flawed immigration policies, as the coronavirus crisis highlights the contribution of immigration to the UK's frontline services and businesses. The call comes after the UK government chartered a number of flights for Romanian workers to come to the UK and to work on farms which are at risk from losing their summer crops, despite continuing to pursue its reckless Brexit plans. The National Farmers Union, the NFU Scotland, also pressed the UK government's ministers to allow in more workers, warning that due to the global nature of the pandemic, growers across Scotland remain concerned that it will be extremely difficult to recruit the 10,000 workers that are required annually to undertake seasonal horticultural work. While on the front line, there are a significant number of doctors and healthcare workers who have come to the UK and are at the forefront of the fight against the coronavirus. Commenting, Stuart MacDonald, the MP, said, "The coronavirus crisis is a global pandemic. It doesn't recognise borders, nationality or politics. However, the pandemic has highlighted the contribution of those who have come to the UK to work and make it their home." With the United Kingdom government having to charter flights to bring in hundreds of workers from the EU countries to help UK farms to survive, despite pursuing a reckless and isolationist Brexit plan at the same time, a significant number of migrant doctors and healthcare workers on the front line in the fight against COVID-19 and asylum seekers and refugees keen to utilise their medical skills to help the NHS. The lessons are there to be learned. I hope that the UK government will finally see the contribution migrants and so-called low-skilled workers make to our country, and that it urgently overhauls its hostile and flawed immigration policies. For too long, UK immigration policies have also threatened to plunge Scotland's working-age population into decline, to cause serious staffing shortages in key industries, including agriculture and hospitality, and inflict lasting damage to our public sector services, leaving Scotland poorer and worse off. Now, Chris, I know as a former union official, this is something close to your heart as well. The idea that the UK's hostile immigration policies are keeping people from coming to the United Kingdom to help with the COVID-19 virus, the fight against it. And some of the workers that we need are the very ones that the immigration policy is there to exclude, like for example, the fruit pickers. We need food, and also obviously we need cleaning staff, and we need nursing staff and care staff, just to name a few.
I mean, that's been shown over last weekend. There's been numerous reports in the British media about the flights that were coming over from Romania, where the British government have been actively recruiting people to come over and work in the fields. Now, the proportion of workers that they got compared to what Britain needs as a whole is, a pebble in a pond, to be quite honest with you, a pebble in the lock even. Because you quite rightly mentioned doctors, nurses, fruit pickers, people who work in the fishing industry, and people
Chris,
who are willing to do the type of manual labour that, quite frankly, actually, the British public are not willing to do. And yet, this pandemic is not going to go away by the 31st of December. And this is something that the UK government don't realise. And Nicola Sturgeon made this all too plain this afternoon, is that we are going to be dealing with this pandemic for the next few years. Yes, eventually, we will come out of the harsh lockdown measures that we're currently in, and we will go on with some sort of social distancing involved, some sort of PPE wearing involved, and life as we know it. I hate to sound like Star Trek, but life as we know it, Jim, is going to change. So to say that the 31st of December, we will not need any of this migration in order to help the fight of COVID-19 and keep the supply chain working within Britain is simply madness. It is utter madness.
I think when it comes to things like the fruit picking, for example, Chris, we know that before the Brexit vote in 2016, many of the people who were most vociferous for keeping out Eastern Europeans were the very people who lived in the areas where the fruit farms were. And by shutting them out, they were denying the farmers the opportunity to get in the harvest and actually run their businesses.
Well, we only need to look at that doyen of the green benches, who thankfully is no longer there, a certain Kirsten Hare, who was moaning about the fact that her daddy's fruit wasn't going to be picked because of a lack of migrant workers. Yet, she was lauding quite happily, gleefully even, that she had secured a deal with the English government to procure 9,000 workers, which would not even cover the whole of the cider operation in Taunton, let alone, even consider about sending 56 of them up on a bus to Angus.
Well, of course, there is another problem, Chris, isn't there? The people coming from Romania on 2 charter flights are going to have to be somehow isolated in case they're carrying the coronavirus. You've got 2 crises rolled up into one.
Yeah, and you've also got that. You've also got that issue as well of will Britain be viewed as a country? Dare I say, I'm just want to put this out here, just for the development of it, who are willing to use and abuse migration labour for the sheer hell of it, and then when they're no longer required or surplus to requirements, they then get papped back to their own country to get on with it.
Chris, listen, I'm going to have to cut across you and end that piece just now. We're moving on to our next story, which also involves the Home Office, and this is the case of the ex-Home Office chief who is launching a bullying tribunal claim against the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. Priti Patel is facing legal action under whistleblowing laws after her former permanent secretary, Sir Philip Rutnam, lodged an employment tribunal claim on Monday, saying that he was forced from his job for exposing her bullying behaviour. Rutnam claims that he was constructively dismissed from his role as Home Office Permanent Secretary after informing the Cabinet Office that Patel had belittled officials in meetings and made unreasonable demands on staff. The development will increase pressure on Patel, who has denied claims that she bullied civil servants in 3 government departments, and on Boris Johnson, who has publicly backed his Home Secretary. She is also the subject of a Cabinet Office inquiry into her behaviour. It's the first time that Rutnam has said he will make a claim of protected disclosure under whistleblowing laws, and it's the first time that a Secretary of State has been sued by a former permanent secretary. Another consequence of a whistleblowing claim means that instead of a ceiling of £85,000 on Rutnam's claim, there will be no upper limit on any damages he might receive. Announcing the start of the legal action, the General Secretary of the Civil Service Union, AFDA, David Penman, told The Guardian, "This morning Sir Philip, with the support of his legal team and the FDA, submitted a claim to the Employment Tribunal for constructive dismissal and whistleblowing against the Home Secretary. So Philip will not be making any further comment at this time. Rutnam's claim is expected to focus on Patel's treatment of senior civil servants in the Home Office. According to reports, senior Home Office official collapsed after a fractious meeting with Patel. Patel is understood to have successfully asked for another senior official in the department to be moved from their job. Rutnam subsequently wrote to all senior civil servants in the department, highlighting the dangers of workplace stress. He also made clear that they could not be expected to do unrealistic work outside of office hours. After a report in the Times highlighted tensions between Rutnam and Patel, sources close to Patel were quoted in several newspapers as saying that Rutnam should resign. An article in the Times said that he should be stripped of his pension. Another in the Telegraph said that he was nicknamed Dr. No for the negative ideas, and while the Sun compared him to Eeyore. At that time, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said that Johnson had full confidence in the Home Secretary and in the civil service, although the same guarantee was not given to Rutnam specifically. The ministerial code states that there must be no bullying and no harassment. Despite holding one of the great four offices of state during a national pandemic, Patel has rarely been seen in public since allegations of bullying emerged in February. She made one appearance at the Daily Downing Street coronavirus meeting and was criticised after saying she was sorry if people felt there had been a failure to supply sufficient personal protective equipment to the NHS. That was the famous non-apology. So, Chris, what are we to make of this? Rutnam has now come forward and is actually suing Ms. Patel for, well, it seems like a limitless amount of money by all accounts.
Well, I tell you, honestly, Gordon, you're brave if you're asking me to comment on Priti Patel. I do say, what can I say about, this complete subhuman, a poor excuse for a politician. She makes Malcolm Tucker look like an angel. And the striking resemblance towards her and Malcolm Tucker from the thick of it is absolutely quite startling. It honestly is. She is bereft of compassion. She is bereft of any persona. She has got no interpersonal skills whatsoever. How on earth her constituents could even vote for her is absolutely beyond me. And it just strikes of, there are just no words to convey of my loathing for not just her, but pretty much the whole of the front bench. Because bear it in mind as well, is that, as notable as Priti Patel's absence has been at the recent updates, we have to take note as well that Boris, he's been sidelined, allowed to be discharged from the intensive care unit and conveniently be able to travel 41 miles to his palatial weekend retreat of Chequers. Well, one of three houses that he could choose to actually live in for by Downing Street and his luxurious pad in Chelsea. Honestly, it is absolutely shocking that these people are getting away with it. And what really, really gets my goat is that the process that we have to go through for things that we already know is absolutely horrendous.
Chris, I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on to our next story. We've got a tight schedule this evening. Actually, the next story...
I take the hat off to you, Gordon, for even asking me about
the next story is about money in people's pockets. And this story is about households who face a £515 a month hit to their disposable income. The SNP has renewed calls on the Chancellor to review and fix the coronavirus job retention scheme, which has now gone live, warning that without meaningful changes, many people risk falling through the gaps into further hardship. The call comes as it was also revealed by the Centre for Economics and Business Research that households across the UK will have £43 billion less in disposable income between the months of April and June, amounting to approximately £515 per household as people face a reduction or even a total loss of income due to the coronavirus crisis. Alison Thewlis, MP, the SNP's Shadow Chancellor, said, "It's disappointing that the UK government has not addressed the serious gaps in its job retention scheme and the real risk of thousands of businesses and workers missing out and being pushed into further hardship. The narrow changes made to the scheme previously fall short of the action required to ensure people have access to the support that they desperately need, including a move to make sure that anyone with a contract of employment by the 19th of March was covered. With new research revealing that households face a sharp hit to their disposable income of £515 per month, it's vital that the Chancellor takes heed of the warnings and goes much further in delivering support to help people and businesses who are in severe financial difficulty through no fault of their own. The SNP has been clear from the start of the crisis that the Chancellor must introduce a comprehensive financial package to ensure that no one is left behind, including looking again at bringing forward a guaranteed minimum income and strengthening welfare protections. Now, as we both know, Chris, this is obviously not the first time that the subject of a guaranteed minimum income has come up. But the fact that they've now got a number of £515 as the loss to each household really brings it home to you, doesn't it? £515 a month is a lot of money, especially for the more poorly paid workers.
It's a heck of a lot of money, Gordon, and how people, honestly, I've lost 2 part-time jobs through this. At the moment I'm managing to get by on the savings that I've got, but I can only imagine and sympathise with people who, through no fault of their own, just cannot put money by for a rainy day. But I'll take this opportunity, please, Gordon, if you'll indulge me, and I will stress to the viewers that if you're in a trade union, please go to the STUC website. They have some fantastic information about employers' rights and employees' rights as to how these schemes work and who actually qualifies for them.
Okay.
Because bear in mind, that cut-off of, I think you said March the
19th of March, I think, Chris.
19th of March, yeah. But you got to remember that many businesses actually closed before that.
Indeed.
Because the furlough offer was actually mooted about 2 or 3 weeks prior to it actually coming out and being ratified by the government. There are people who have possibly fallen through the cracks.
Do you have?
If they go to the SUEC website, they will get guidance, Chris, as to whether they will be able to fill those gaps.
And is there a contact number that people can use, Chris, if they want to get in touch with the trade
union? I honestly
union?
don't have the SUEC contact number off the top of my head. A simple search into Google, if you just put in STUC, they are down in Woodlands Road in the West End. If you put in www.stuc.org, I think will probably take you to their .uk.
.org.uk, Chris, I understand.
That will direct you to their website and get in touch. Okay,
so just for those of you who might have missed it, it is www.stuc.org.uk. For those of you who want to get in touch with the Scottish Trade Union Congress.
Now, the memory goes.
Chris, we're moving on to our next story now. And this is another call for action, this time as businesses are left out in the cold over insurance claims. The SNP's Shadow Chancellor, who seems to be very busy this week, has called on the UK government to address emerging gaps in the insurance claims as a result of the coronavirus crisis, following concerns raised by businesses abandoned without cover. Policyholders across Scotland, many of them small and medium-sized business owners, have expressed frustration at claims being rejected, a number of them because COVID-19 isn't specified in their policy, despite having infectious disease cover in their business interruption insurance. The Financial Times highlighted that some insurers have moved swiftly to tighten up the wording of terms and conditions to exclude COVID-19 from policies starting this month, prompting questions about whether they felt that previous policy terms made them liable. Professor Sir Charles Bean, the committee member of the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, also suggested to the Treasury Select Committee that the UK government should act as an insurer of last resort. Commenting, Alison Thewlis MP said, "There are growing concerns that many small and medium-sized businesses face being left out in the cold and pushed into hardship, as some insurers have moved quickly to tighten up the wording in their terms and conditions to exclude COVID-19 from policies. It's been a month since I asked the Chancellor to stand behind businesses left without cover by their insurers, and so far, no support has been forthcoming. Many businesses have paid their insurance policies dutifully and were relying on that cover in order to stay afloat during these challenging times. When I also raised this issue with the Chancellor back in March, it was made unequivocally clear that for businesses without the requisite cover, it's important that the UK government thinks more broadly about direct support for businesses, and yet this has been sorely lacking. Many responsible businesses have taken prudent and financial steps of taking out an insurance policy to protect against unforeseen events, such as the outbreak of a virus. It now seems incredible that insurance companies can suddenly abandon their responsibilities in this way. Insurance policies, which cover smallpox eradicated 40 years ago, but not COVID-19, give little comfort to those who've had have had to close their doors and furlough staff on the instruction of public authorities. While I don't ask insurers to retrospectively change policies, it's clear that the UK government must seriously look at steps to act as an insurer of last resort and to cover the gaps between in these policies and protect struggling businesses across the UK. Again, Chris, this is something which will be familiar to many people, that insurance companies, when you're trying to make a claim, they will always try and reduce the amount of money they pay to you. But for them to change the rules like this and move the goalposts seems, well, I mean, it's unethical, surely.
Well, it's like something out of a Monty Python sketch, to be honest with you. You know, yes, well, your policy includes the bubonic plague, the black plague, and X amount of locusts and stuff like that, but not the current plague that we're dealing with at the moment, which is COVID-19. Corporations will always try and scrimp and save a buck. The wider question here, which actually I picked out from what you were reading there, Gordon, is that the government should be the insurer of last resort, because at the end of the day, this government has absolutely woefully mismanaged the whole COVID-19 pandemic out of gargantuan proportions. And quite rightly, today, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, was pressed on the question of how well has the government, been on this. And she was like, look, I'm not going to go down the road of point scoring and whatnot and what have you.
Chris?
But the day of reckoning will come later on.
Listen, Chris, I apologise. Chris, I'm going to have to cut you short there, I'm afraid, Chris. I'm sorry. We're running out of time this evening, but we have a lot of stories to get through tonight.
No, I was just going to say that.
Anyway, our next story, Chris, is a little bit more hopeful, I think. The UK is to trial coronavirus treatments using blood from survivors. Health officials have prioritised 2 clinical trials that will be supplied with blood from recovered COVID-19 patients in the hope that transfusions can help save the lives of people hospitalised with the infection. NHS Blood and Transplant has started to collect blood from recovered patients with a view to using the antibody-rich serum to boost the immune systems of patients struggling to overcome the virus. The limited supply of convalescent plasma will be given to patients enrolled on sub-duties at the recovery trial led by Peter Horby at the University of Oxford, and REMAP-CAP trial led by the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre in London. The recovery trial will assess whether plasma helps patients to recover before they're admitted to intensive care, while the REMAP-CAP trial will investigate whether similar transfusions help to save the patients who are already in high dependency or intensive care units. At least one trial was designed to assess whether the plasma could protect healthy people who are in close contact with COVID-19 patients, such as NHS staff and family members, but it was rejected by the NHSBT amid a shortage of donated serum. Convalescent plasma therapy dates back more than a century and was first used in 1918 in the Spanish flu epidemic. The treatment relies on the presence of antibodies that provide some level of immunity to patients who have recovered from the virus. The most effective transfusions contain high levels of antibodies that can, in principle, boost the recipient's immune defenses for weeks. Doctors in China used convalescent plasma as an emergency therapy when the outbreak was raging on the mainland. And while early anecdotal evidence suggests it may have helped, formal clinical trials are needed to determine whether the intervention is really safe and effective, and that patients would not have recovered just as well without it. In the United States, where the number of reported coronavirus cases is greater than any other country, doctors have rapidly expanded a trial of convalescent plasma, which has been given to hundreds of patients. Professor Sir Robert Leclerc, the president of the Academy of Sciences and Dr. King's Health Partners, which includes King's College London, is keen to trial the therapy. So, Chris, convalescent patients' blood being taken to create a serum which could possibly help those who are at risk of having to go into or are already in high intensity care. What do you think?
I'm not medically inclined, but it seems to me
I have to say, I
what
don't
they were
have an
saying a
opinion
couple
on
of
this
weeks
either.
ago was that people who have come through the coronavirus, successfully, and currently back home now and stuff like that, they've built up an antibody within themselves and stuff like that, and they are now, I don't know if they're completely immune or if they're just saying that there's a higher a low level of them getting it again. So it would make sense that you would analyse their blood to see how things are going. But I think also as well it's worth to say that the University of Glasgow are as well as these two universities that you cited down south, they are also leading the way in technology and trying to find some sort of vaccine or some sort of antivirus for this. But politicians make it painfully apparent that any vaccine is not going to be seen readily this side of Christmas, I'm afraid. So,
no,
again, we need to still go by that tried and trusted method of, the social isolation.
Well, of course, synthesizing a vaccine, Chris, I think is an awful lot harder than dealing with plasma. I mean, with a vaccine, you're having to isolate the virus and kind of disarm it so it becomes deactivated and can be injected or given as a jag, like the flu jag. I think we're quite a long way away from that.
I'm not a medical thing, so I wouldn't like to comment on that.
Okay. Listen, Chris, I'd like to move on to another story, this time in Germany. And Germany is reopening shops at the moment, just as Mrs. Merkel is warning of a second wave of coronavirus. Germany has reopened some shops and small businesses as Angela Merkel, beg your pardon, warned of the possibility of a second wave of coronavirus infection if lockdown measures were eased too swiftly. In a video call with party colleagues, the Chancellor said that the discussion orgies taking place in some German federal states on relaxing curbs on public life were unhelpful and could lead to a rise in the country's infection rate. She said she was greatly concerned the public might let its guard down. Bookshops, florists, fashion stores, bike and car outlets and other shops smaller than 800 square metres were all permitted to reopen on Monday morning in the first wave of easing the lockdown introduced last month. The tentative removal of some restrictions has begun in many but not all European countries. Norway's government reopened nurseries on Monday after a month-long closure. It said it was possible because children were less affected by COVID-19, adding that the virus was now under control. Going to preschool is safe, Norway's Education Minister Guri Melby declared. Some parents, however, have criticised the move, a sentiment also seen in Denmark, where primary schools reopened last week. A Norwegian Facebook group called My Child Should Not Be a Guinea Pig for COVID-19 has gathered nearly 30,000 signatures. And polls suggest around a quarter of Norwegian parents do not want to send their children back to preschool. In Poland, parks and forests were due to reopen on Monday, while the Czech Republic open-air markets were allowed to resume as part of a 6-week strategy to gradually lift restrictions. Austria has already reopened some shops. 3 countries have seen significantly fewer coronavirus deaths than the worst affected countries in Europe: Italy, Spain, France and the UK. France has signalled that nurseries, primary and secondary schools would reopen on the 11th of May at the end of a strict lockdown period. The Prime Minister, Eduardo Philipp, said the return would be gradual. Merkel indicated on Monday that Germany would consider reopening schools next month. In Spain, with nearly 200,000 confirmed cases and more than 20,000 deaths, the authorities have said they will hold off lifting restrictions on what is one of Europe's toughest lockdowns. The rate of infection appears to be going down. The country reported 399 coronavirus deaths over the past 48 hours, lower than Sunday's figure of 410. So, Chris, it looks as though, on the face of it, that many European countries are beginning now to, one by one, relax some of the enforced lockdown that they've been going through for the last few weeks.
Yeah, this is in line with the curve of coronavirus because these countries have been hit by the coronavirus much earlier than when it came to the UK.
So they're a bit ahead of us then,
yeah? Yeah. So they're very much ahead of us, and it is trial and error as to what works, we have said all along, whilst I don't actually agree with the whole four-state approach to the whole COVID-19, but that's a personal thing. That's nothing to do.
I know that in Scotland, Chris, Nicola Sturgeon was mentioning that she thinks that Scotland's lifting of restrictions will not follow exactly the same path as the rest of the UK.
Yeah, that's correct, and fair play to her, for doing that. I mean, I'm not part of Nicola's PR team. God, I wish I was. Although I'm Nicola's #1 comrade on Twitter. But what I was trying to say to you, Gordon, is that Scotland have said that they will take best practice from other countries around the world.
Yeah.
And if Germany is doing stuff different from, say, for argument's sake, Italy, then and it works for them, then we could maybe say we'll take a little bit of that. We'll maybe take a little bit out of the Czech Republic, and we'll maybe take a wee bit out of Poland, and and possibly a wee smidgen out of France.
Chris,
what gets me is that there have been calls that are my own personal concerns is that there's been calls in the UK for the likes of B&Q and Homebase to reopen.
Yeah.
And where does it,
Chris,
where does it end?
I'm sorry to rush you here, Chris. We have a couple more stories to fit in before the end of the programme. This next one, I think you'll find interesting. More community food projects will receive funding to provide emergency free meals to the most in need during the coronavirus epidemic. Around £700,000 has been allocated from the £70 million Scottish Food Fund to 19 projects, including £350,000 grant to the Wheatley Group to provide 8,500 emergency deliveries to people most in need in 17 local authority areas as part of its Eat Well service over the next 3 months. A further 18 schemes will share £400,000 to provide emergency food through a range of projects, working with minority ethnic households, family support groups or mental health teams. The Food Fund comprises £30 million for food deliveries for the shielded groups at highest clinical risk, and a further £30 million to local authorities for free school meals and food support for older people and those with long-term health conditions and pregnant women. The remaining £10 million is for critical third sector and community response organisations, includes funding so far of £500,000 each for Social Bite, Fair Share and Cash for Kids. The Community Secretary Aileen Campbell said, as part of Scotland's £70 million food fund, we're making an initial £10 million available to help support community food projects. And those latest grants will help ensure people are not just fed, but treated with dignity. I'm very grateful to be working alongside the Trussell Trust, Fair Share and other members of the Independent Food Network to provide people at risk in our communities with basic essentials for their families' needs. I'm particularly pleased that Fair Share is now working closely with many councils to strengthen local responses. So Chris, a good news story this. The Scottish Government handing out large sums of money to very worthy charities and other local groups to make sure that nobody goes hungry throughout this the remaining part of this lockdown.
Yeah,
briefly, if you would, Chris.
Actually sees the fact that whatever bizarre way that you look at this, but the socialist approach that the Scottish Government are taking to make sure that there's fairness and dignity and equality for all its citizens is something that's got to be lauded. I just seriously hope that the English government and the Welsh government and the Northern Ireland government are doing the same.
Okay. Chris, our final story tonight is some guidance for those engaged in home learning, teaching their children from home. New guidance to support home learning of children and young people during the term has been issued. It aims to build on a significant amount of positive work already being undertaken by teachers and education professionals across Scotland to support learning at home, as well as the advice and resources that are already available. The guidance covers 3 main areas: learning and teaching at home, including support for digital learning, children who are likely to be disproportionately impacted, and learners with additional support needs. Also, parental involvement and engagement. This includes details of local and national support, how local authorities and schools will require a different approach to being updated on a child's development, and also support for teachers and school leaders, including advice on learning resources, supporting pupils and staff's health and well-being, and leading colleagues and teams during this period. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, said today, given the unprecedented circumstances, we cannot predict when schools in Scotland will reopen. However, our focus is that while schools are closed, learning continues and we all have a role to play. Local authorities, schools, teachers and practitioners know their learners really well and have shown extraordinary dedication and professionalism in adapting and making decisions in the best interests of the children and young people. While we do not expect teachers, parents or families to replicate schools or classrooms, we are committed to working with all partners in Scotland's education system to protect pupils' well-being and ensure learning can continue in an appropriate way wherever possible. Now, we've only got a few scant moments left, Chris, of the show, but this sounds like another good news story. The Scottish Government doing something useful to help with those who are homeschooling their kids.
Can I just make one observation? I have not, and I'd be happily be corrected, but I have yet to hear the UK Government talk about schools in the way that the Scottish Government has been talking about schools and education. Yeah. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I've just been concentrating on Scottish politics I would like to be corrected if because I haven't heard anything from the education minister down in England about.
No, I have to agree, Chris. It seems to me that we hear a lot about what the Scottish Government is doing every day on these news programmes. We're announcing more and more things that the Scottish Government is doing, more money they're making available. Not hearing it from the British side so much.
It's all to do with transparency. But just in the very short time that we've got left, can I reiterate to the viewers there that anybody that's looking help from the Scottish Government with regards food packaging or any other sort of like help towards caring, the number is 0800 100 4000. If they phone that, they'll get put through to the local council and they'll be able to direct them as to the best help that is available.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for getting that in at the end. Well, it's come now to the part of the show where I have to ask you if you would like to help us make more programmes. Now, as you know, Broadcasting Scotland is run by volunteers, and it takes money, obviously, to make programmes for you. So if you enjoy the output of Broadcasting Scotland and you'd like to become a supporter, you can do so by following the directions on the screen now at www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register and follow the prompts on the website. Now that's it from Scotland at 7 this Monday. I'll be back again on Thursday, and my compatriot Kenny will be taking over the show for the next 2 days. But that's it from Scotland at 7 tonight. A very good night to you.